put downable. And there were so many things in this book that I resonated with, so many things that were just so interesting to learn about. And I was wondering if you could just start by summarizing the book for anyone here who hasn't read it yet, kind of what it's about, because I'm just going to start listing things like motherhood and fertility and grief and marriage and divorce and so much generational trauma. I'm just going to go on and on. So
Totally. So this book is about my quest to figure out whether or not I should have a baby. And I spent many, many years of my life thinking I was in the hell no camp. I would never have a baby because I come from a long line of women who abandon their children, which is the first line of my book. And so I thought that if I had a child, I would abandon my child too, which is actually where the title, The Mother Code, comes from. I thought that there was a defect in my genetic code that would make me abandon any kids that I would have. And so I thought to myself, finally, I married a guy who didn't want children. And I thought to myself, I should make 100% sure that I don't want a kid before I finally make this decision. So I went on a quest, which I describe in this book, to talk to as many people as I could about whether I should have a baby. Everyone from my, the obvious fertility doctors to my friends to at one point a masseuse.
I like that section.
So it's there's this
your therapist,
my therapist, my husband at the time, spoiler alert, we're not married anymore, who was adamantly from day one, I never wanted a child. So no. And yeah, the truth was I had no idea what I wanted deep inside. And so part of this book is untangling my, the fact that so many of us, not just me, but I know myself the best, so I'll talk about myself, but that I had such a hard time understanding my deepest desires. And I think that that's something that is very challenging, especially for women.
Yeah. There's so much I related to. I'm married and divorced and married again. I now have a total of 6 kids, 3 that I gave birth to, 3 stepkids. But my first husband, who I ended up having 2 kids with, I told him on our first date that I didn't want to have children. I was like, I want to sleep under the stars in Africa. I want to write books. I want to travel. I do not want to have kids. You need to know this about me. And literally 11 months later, I was pregnant by choice. So there was a lot. I found myself really pondering my own journey. I'm now 16 years into motherhood, and I lost my mother when I was 18. So motherhood has a very loaded layer for me. And that was a big part of the reason I didn't want to have kids, was because I thought, how can I have kids if I don't have a mom? How can I even go on this journey without my own mother here? And so I just found myself really pondering so much and reflecting a lot on my journey, which was, I was really appreciative of that and that opportunity to think about a lot of things. Some that I had very deliberately chosen and thought a lot about, and some that I just kind of barreled into or that happened to me. There's a lot about motherhood that we don't have choices over.
And the word choice itself, I find I try to pick it apart because we think we have choices. And then there's other things where you just wake up one day and you're sort of backed into something that you aren't so sure that you chose ultimately.
There was a lot of existential pondering in your book, which I really appreciate as well. I mean, I work in this grief realm. And so I sit with people every day who are dying or have died. And I'm always thinking about just the kind of existential reality of getting out of bed in the day and what the consequences we face with that. And you ask that question a lot in here too.
Yeah, what's worthy of our time, right? We have a finite amount of time on this planet. So if parenting is maybe not the thing that you want to do, then what else would you do with your time? Which is what I asked myself. I thought I'm not going to be a mom. I have to figure out what masterpiece I'm going to make. And so the pressure of that.
It's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, it's a lot of pressure.
Would you read to us?
Yeah. Yes. So I was thinking about what section to read, and I think I want to read from the very beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah, so stop me if I go on too long, but
No.
I'll set this up for you guys. Okay. I come from a long line of women who abandoned their children, or at least that's what I'd been told. For as long as I can remember, I've heard about how my great-grandmother Kitty and my grandmother Ruth ditched their kids because of men or money or mental problems or all of the above. As the story goes, Kitty left her son and daughter with her in-laws so she could gallivant around Europe, manhunting, as my mom calls it on a good day. On a bad day, my mom will let it all hang out. Kitty was a gold digger, she told me recently when I called to let her know that I'd been researching the women in our family. We were on video, so I could see my mom's face, the way her lips curled in disgust when I mentioned Kitty's name. What you don't understand is that all Kitty cared about was money, she said. She'd marry one rich man only to leave him when she met another man who was even richer. As I listened to my mom, what I heard was the conviction in her voice. She was certain that her take on Kitty was true. There couldn't be any other explanation for my great-grandmother's behavior. Kitty was cruel to her children and her grandchildren, and money was the culprit. End of story. She was married 25 times next to her ear, the universal symbol for cuckoo. But she was. I shook my head. 25 times sounded ludicrous, impossible. Yet despite all the hyperbole and hysteria about Kitty, the stories about the men she loved and left as quickly as a mouse can snatch a piece of cheese from a trap, I later learned there was some truth to the family legends. Over the years, I interviewed an aunt, an uncle, and a cousin. I even spent a weekend in Baltimore with Kitty's son before he died. Kitty didn't want to be a mother, he told me unequivocally, which is something I'd never heard anyone admit out loud about a woman, especially one who became a wife for the first time in 1917, when women were meant to worship their husbands and children. Much later, I searched through census records, old newspapers, marriage and divorce decrees, and immigration files. I learned Kitty went by at least 5 first names: Kitty, Coon, Katie, Kate, and Catherine. Eventually, I could decipher facts from fables. I dug up documentation for 14 of Kitty's marriages. Her shortest was only 10 days. She married my great-grandfather Irving twice, the first time at just 17. My grandmother Ruth followed in her mother's footsteps, abandoning her first child, Beth, to marry my grandfather. The truth is this: I'd always secretly rooted for Kitty and Ruth, though I never told anyone in my family. I assumed that everyone denigrated them because they roamed around for their own pleasure, as if there was anything wrong with that. But I understood that of course there was. A woman living her life for herself has never been allowed. Women at that time didn't choose whether or not to be mothers. What would choice have even meant for my great-grandmother and grandmother when the system, their families, their community, their religion, the culture they were steeped in only showed them images of women as mothers? Mothering was natural. It was normal. There was no question of desire or a path for opting out. They could only choose to mother as much as a fish chooses to live in water. It's what they had to do. It's what women did. We now have a language, a lexicon for maternal ambivalence. But back then, back in the early to mid 1900s, women were mothers and that was that. Yet Kitty and Ruth always scoffed at the rules, which is what I admired about them. The problem with public records is that the emotional tenor of the past is erased. I have no idea if Kitty loved any of her husbands or if Ruth loved hers. I have no idea why Kitty left them or if perhaps they left her. I have no idea if she was looking for money from them or some other type of security. I have my guesses though. Citizenship was a priority for a Jewish girl who spoke only Yiddish and never went to school after arriving at Ellis Island in 1906 at the age of just 6. It may be true, as my family tells me, that Kitty married a Chicago gangster, then divorced him because Chicago was too cold, or that she married the owner of a jewelry store empire in South Florida and left him when his business went kaput. And then finally, in her 90s, living out the last of her days in a nursing home, she married the man several decades her junior, whom she called, what's his name? I'll end there.
I should have asked you this before we sat down, but how much do you want to disclose about how this journey unfolds? You go on, you decide that you want to become a mother.
I do.
And how much do you want to disclose about how that goes once you've decided?
We can
spoiler alert stuff.
We can talk spoilers.
Okay. Because
as long as everyone buys the book.
So walk us through. You decide. How do you decide? How do you finally know?
So I went to my therapist and I said, this baby question is driving me crazy. And she said, on a scale of 0 to 100, how badly do you want a baby? And I said 55%. And she's like, there you go. And I was like, shouldn't I really know? Like 99%? If I'm going to annihilate every dream I've ever had, my entire identity, because that's what we've been told, right? If you're going to have a kid, you have to be all in. Why would I do it for something I want 55%? And she's like, well, what makes you think 55% isn't enough? That 55% number is telling you something, that you wanted a little more than you don't. And so I went home that night to the man I had married that I had promised that I was not going to have children with. And I now knew that I probably wanted a kid a little bit more than I didn't. And what did I do? Nothing. I did nothing. And that was a real turning point for me in writing this book, that I finally knew that I probably wanted a baby, but then I went home and I didn't actually do the thing that would, I continued to contort myself. Yeah. I continued to pretzel to make this marriage work for 2 more years. Yeah. And that really surprised me. And that was something I didn't, it's obvious, but I didn't realize it until I was writing it.
Yeah.
Why didn't I go home and say, you know what, we can't be together anymore? I was cruising, hoping life would somehow answer it for me.
The book opens also beyond the passage you read with you in a bookstore running into this man who is now your ex-husband, and you're pregnant. Walk us a little bit there.
I hadn't seen him in many years after.
You had gone on a whole new journey.
On a whole nother journey, which you'll read about or maybe we'll discuss.
Yeah.
And then I run into him, and I'm so surprised by running into him. First of all, he was in a bookstore.
In your neighborhood.
And I was like, you didn't read literature when we were together. And then I also knew he had been dating someone from the time we had gotten separated. And I had all these questions in my mind about whether they were gonna now have a child together and I was somehow gonna be humiliated by this, other relationship that turned into, a baby. And there I was pregnant and happy and with someone new. But I couldn't get it out of my head that this was what was I going to say to him until basically neither of us said anything. We just ignored each other.
Which is indicative of your marriage.
Which is indicative of the entire thing. Yeah.
But you go on this pretty deliciously satisfying dating journey to find the man that you want to have a kid with. I got divorced and remarried and had my own mid-30s dating journey with 2 kids already in hand. And I remembered this man that I had dated for a little while who I got pretty close to. We had a 9-month thing until it took a turn when we were laying in bed one morning discussing the relationship and why it wasn't working. And he finally said to me, he looked at me, he was like, you are so perfect. I love everything about you. I love that you write books. I love that you do this work. I love this and this and this. He's like, I just think you would be perfect if you didn't have kids. And he had kids. He already had kids. It was just going to be too many kids with all of our kids.
Right.
And so you go on a journey of lots of kind of ups and downs and exploring, finding a man who wants to have a kid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
And also considering the idea of not finding a partner and having a kid.
And
there's so much amazing research in this book too about all the different ways we can become mothers, and women do become mothers, especially in today's day and age. That was really fascinating to read about.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite parts of the book was the name of the chapter is Outlaw Motherhood. And I went on this sort of literary quest to find out if I was going to have a child with a partner or not. Was there any way to have a child that could be radical? Like, could being a mom not be seen as like weak and like denigrating? Because I felt like that's all I'd seen in the media, in my own life, at the role models that I had. And so going into the literature and being able to read about women like Barbara Ehrenreich and Toni Morrison, who wrote very vividly about their revolutionary mothering. And there's this amazing anthology.
The Toni Morrison quotes were really great.
Like she said, she's never written anything without, basically the kind of primal scream of her child, like radiating through it. And I love that. But what I found was that even though I minored in women's studies and had read so much kind of what I would consider feminist literature, I really didn't have a grasp on the Black and brown communities and the kinship networks and the ways that there are so many communities of women and families that have created alternative shapes to motherhood. And I started to question why this very kind of white bread image of motherhood is the one that we all know so well. And so that to me was a real turning point that, yeah, I could have a child, but also could I have a child and do motherhood differently?
Yeah, say more about the idea of motherhood as a radical act.
Yeah, so is there a way to teach your children that your own dreams as a woman and as a mother are, and your own self-actualization is just as important as the mothering, so that like you are becoming a mother and becoming more of yourself as you're mothering. And I think that sounds like so obvious. And I mean, it's 2025, people. Like, it should be so obvious. And yet the fact that we can mother and do other things really is radical.
Yeah. There was a quote in there from Jeanette Winterson that really gave me chills and pause. She said something along the lines of how she couldn't find a female literary model who did the work she wanted to do and also led an ordinary heterosexual life with kids. And she said, think about how many Nobel Prize winners we've lost because they were mothers instead, or how many other creative types we've lost because they chose motherhood. Do you think that's entirely true? Like, I really started thinking, like, can I think of this? Where is she? Where is that woman?
Yeah, yes. I think that we're told that we have to choose. Do I think it needs to be true? No, I don't think it needs to be an either or, but we're told we need to choose between mothering and anything else. And so I think there's so much proof. I mean, we're sitting up here, like you can mother and write books, for example. But I also think like there's a lot you have to overcome in terms of like the voices in your own head and the voices in society in order to be able to do those things. Because we're told we can't, or that we shouldn't.
I thought about this a lot for myself. I wrote 3 books and had 3 kids in a 10-year span, and one or the other was always taking a hit. Like, either the parenting and the mothering, or the books and the publishing and the, that whole career. And it's an insane balancing act and judgment on both sides from the outside world. I think there's a lot of outside world judgment that comes with all of that.
Yeah. And I quote Claire Dieter, who's an amazing writer in the book, and she talks about, abandonment as the kind of biggest crime a woman can commit, maternal abandonment. And that in some way, as a writer, you have to shut the door on your children. And not only as a writer, to do anything, you have to at some point shut the door on your children. And that can feel like a form of abandonment at some point.
So tell us about your fertility journey.
It's a big question. Yeah. So
It's a big question, but it's also such a huge question for so many that I think that's one of the reasons this book is so amazing and is going to speak to so many women. And I think it's just going to be such a place for a lot of women to turn.
Yeah, I hope so. So finally, so there's a chapter in the book called 60 Dates in 6 Months. I went on a lot of dates.
You were really strategic with this.
I was trying to be strategic after not being strategic for a very, very, very long time. So I went on a lot of dates, and I finally met this man who's now my husband, Rob, who's very wonderful. But by the time we met and got to know each other and did all the things you need to do to have kids together, I was 41 years old, and it wasn't easy to have kids at that point. And I should say that I had, when I was in my first marriage, I had frozen my eggs when I was 35, thinking that this was my life.
Which I learned a lot about that I didn't know.
I thought it was a guarantee. I thought that meant, I had these frozen eggs. It's my insurance policy. I keep in my back pocket for the day when I need it. And I needed it. And I was 41, and we thawed those eggs, and there were 14 of them, by the way. And I was told by my doctor, you'll be able to have 2 kids. And I was like, oh, great, because I only want 1. So this is perfect. None of those eggs worked. None of them were viable, ultimately. And so after that crushing defeat, we tried IVF twice, and that was all, neither of those times worked. And by then I was already 42. And as you can imagine, every month it's like this race against time. Mm-hmm. And then finally our doctor said, do you want to try donor eggs? And I had never even heard of it, thought of it. This idea, and this relates back to the title of the book, The Mother Code. I had spent so long running away from the generational trauma in my family, running away from the flaws, the defects that I thought lived in my DNA. This idea of using someone else's DNA to have a child should have been like a huge relief for me. But then suddenly being faced with this decision on whether or not to move forward with donor eggs, there was a lot of grief around, wait, it's like, yes, I have a line that always makes me laugh, like my family's full of like assholes and addicts or something like that. But they're my assholes and my addicts. Like they're the devil I know. Like who knows what's in someone else's DNA?
You did so much cool research about donor eggs and the genetics and the epigenetics. And I thought it was so fascinating. Can you share maybe some of the highlights that you learned?
Yeah. So
because you were so curious about how much of your DNA, your essence would even be in this child. That was your big question about, should I do this,
Yeah.
And if I do, well, yeah.
Yeah. Like what will happen? Like I was wondering, would I have any imprint on my child if I used a donor egg? Mm-hmm. I would care. So basically, I mean, I don't know how much you guys know about donor eggs, but basically a donor egg would be mixed with my now husband's sperm, create an embryo, and then transferred into my body. So I would carry this child, but I would have no DNA genetic relationship with this child. So I was like, I might as well be a surrogate. Like I started like calling up every researcher, geneticist I know to be like, will my body like have any influence on this baby at all? And basically no one could answer because there's no research that you can do like that. So I spent a lot of time on that. But then I finally spoke to this one researcher, Deanna Bianchi, and she told me about something called microchimerism, which means that there's little pieces of DNA from the fetus that float around in the mother's body when they're carrying the child. So ultimately, I learned that I would have little pieces of the child's DNA in me and vice versa. Mm-hmm. And that was like this wake-up call moment that there was no way I could be pregnant for 9 months with a child and have my blood's running through their body, like, and no impact at all. Of course I would have an impact, not to mention all of the impact of, raising this child.
Yeah.
So it was just this real wake up call moment.
Yeah, it was really fascinating to read about. Like I said, my mom died when I was 18, and then my first daughter was born when I was 31, and it was really hard to become a mom without my mom here. And I remember learning that we have all of our eggs when we are fetuses in our mother's bodies. So it brought me a lot of comfort to think about how my daughter, all of my kids were in me when I was in her. But then this took it a whole new step further to think that they made I don't know if there still would be at this point, but pieces of her in me now. And I was laying next to my son when I was reading that section, my 6-year-old, and I was thinking about how there's like little pieces of him floating around in me and how incredible that is.
Yeah. And that there's like science around if you have some sort of like heart troubles, then like sometimes the DNA from the fetus can go into
Fix the
and
maternal
like fix
heart.
the maternal heart.
Yeah.
And so it's just fascinating research for anyone that's into that sort of thing, which just like blew me away and kind of changed the course of my my imagination around what was possible in terms of motherhood for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you know you were writing a book when you were doing this research or thinking about all of these things or living through this?
When I was living through this, no. But by the time I was doing the research, I understood that I was writing a book. But there were many different versions of this book. I thought I was going to write a book about my relationship with my mom, which is very complicated because of mental health. My brother, I thought I was going to write a book about him. I have a half brother from my mom and my stepfather who has what I call a triple whammy of rare genetic disorders. So that was another piece of the whole like DNA question for me. And so, there are a lot of versions of this book, but I actually wrote this book in the like throes of the 4th trimester after my daughter. Sorry, spoiler alert, I have a daughter now. And like in this like, whatever time in the morning when she woke up and I was trying to get her back to bed, I was like awake and I was like writing.
Yeah. Well, the book, how has it been to have her? Like, that's not, we go on this whole journey and all these questions, but
sure. I think
you're into motherhood now. You're far into it.
Yeah. So she's 5 now. And I feel like one of the questions, so I talk about, the 55%, I was only 55% sure that I wanted to have a child. And now I say I'm 155% sure that I want to be a mother. But what, like people say, like, was there that like one moment for you that sort of flipped the switch? And I think it didn't happen before she was born. Like I kept waiting for it to happen. But what happened instead was that through just like taking one step in front of the other, and through mothering, I became a mother, if that makes sense. I like mothered until like through the caretaking and the like trials and tribulations.
There was you had a conversation with someone about that concept too in the book. What was that moment?
Yeah, I'm not remembering. I do know that's true.
Yeah, it was about becoming a mother by mothering and
remothering. Oh, yes. Yes. And I'm forgetting her name off the top of my head, this researcher around. Yes. Yeah. But how by doing the thing, that's how you become a mom. But we have all these other conceptions that like, especially for women, that we're just born with this maternal instinct and we know how and we want to mother. But actually it's something that we cultivate over time, which I don't think we talk enough about.
Yeah, no, we don't at all. I think we're going to open it up for questions.
Sure.
Yeah. Anybody? Yeah.
It just popped into my head on that last bit. So that yearning for mothering as a young person, as a little girl, as a child, did you find that did you play with baby dolls? Were you nurturing? Did you have an idealism around motherhood as a little? How were you when you were young?
Yeah, I think I just assumed I'd become a mom because that's what women did. I didn't know there was another option, but I also felt like it just looked like women that I knew weren't having a very good time of it. Like everyone that I knew, my mom, my stepmom, like friends' moms, everyone looked pretty miserable and were like very vocal about how miserable they were. And so I was sort of like, why does anybody do this thing? And then there's a scene from when I'm in college of my best friend and I, we like, kind of thinking about who we were going to be in the world. And like, we were comparing two of our professors, one who was a mom and looked like, disheveled and like, just like, what you'd expect a mom to look like. And the other, like very glamorous, stylish, woman who wasn't a mother, who was probably like 30 years old at the time, but I thought was like, just like so old. I don't know. But as like an 18-year-old, I was like, oh my God, I'm never going to have a kid. I want to be like her. So, yeah.
You said you wrote in the morning before your child woke up. Like, how long was that? Like, how many, a year? Like every morning? Like, every day?
Not every day. This is the other thing, like so many people ask me about is, do you have to write every day? I don't know what your answer to this is, but I do not write every day. I write like 3 or 4 days a week. And no, I was not writing every day. It was like, it took a really long time. But I should have said what I meant was like that I woke up. There was this one scene. I remember waking up and just in the middle of the night and being like in this frantic moment and being like, oh, I know what the opening of my book is going to be. And it was the scene, which is further in the book now, but in my mind was going to be the opening scene of the book, which is a scene when I introduced my daughter, who was just a few days old at the time, to my brother. And my brother that I mentioned to you has all these genetic disorders. And I introduced them on Zoom because it's the middle of COVID, by the way. Like when I finally got around to having a baby and all this stuff, it's like the middle of COVID. I'm like, the universe is telling me something. So like I'm trapped in this apartment, we're on Zoom, and this scene of him meeting her for the first time was really meaningful to me. And then when I finally did sell my book and my editor's like, I love that scene, but it's not the opening chapter of your book. It's like, oh, that's okay. But I needed that like scene to come up for me so that I would start to write. I don't know if that's ever happened to you where it's like the thing you think is like the like clincher for the book. Like,
yeah, it usually isn't, but you need that entry point though. You need to find that moment that you emotionally connect to that sits you up in the middle of the night that enters you into the book at least.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And I was going to say, like, I know you had said, like, do you feel okay, like, with the spoilers and stuff? And I think, like, the answer is yes. And the reason why is because I think it's about the quest and the journey of it that feels like so much more important than like, did she have a baby or not? It's like, how does one go about getting in touch with their deepest desires and trying to figure out like the person they want to be in the world? I don't know how else to say it. And one thing I want to say is that the title of the book changed in meaning for me as I went through that transformational arc. Like I said in the beginning, the title meant in the beginning for me that I thought there was a flaw in my DNA. By the end of the book, the title, The Mother Code, meant that each of us has our own narrative around what kind of mothers we want to be, whether or not we want to be mothers, what the generational trauma is that we have inherited and are questioning, like whether we would pass on. And so to me, the Mother Code became so much more like multifaceted through the writing of the book. Like as I transformed, the meaning of the title transformed too.
It's a really good title.
So I haven't read your book yet. I'm excited to. But I read your essay on Spread the Jelly about your egg donor experience. And I left you a comment today because I donated my eggs. So I was just like really excited to hear your perspective on it. And I kind of wanted to ask, how you did you feel like you wanted any kind of understanding of who this donor was? And like, do you still?
This was a fascinating part of it.
Yeah, because people ask, from my perspective, people are like, what if your biological children try to find you someday? And like, I checked some box that said like, I would allow that 14 years in the future. So, you know, I don't know how different agencies work, but I'm just curious from your side of it, like if you would want to have any relationship at some point, if you would, and I don't know if this is too personal a question, but this is the memoir, I guess. Like, if you plan on talking to your daughter about it, and how, because I know I'm gonna have to tell my actual children about my experience at some point, or I want to, and so yeah, if you're open to talking about that.
Oh my God, yes, I'm so glad you're here.
Yeah.
This is so special.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yes. Okay. So there's a lot of pieces to this. One is that Rob, my husband, and I decided before I even got pregnant that we would talk to our daughter about where she came from. And that was a very important part of the process. One, there's been a lot of research through adoption, like the history of adoption, around talking to kids that have been adopted and not keeping that journey a secret is very important mental health wise. And so with donor eggs and donor sperm, that's been a very important part of the process. So we had to actually do like a psychological evaluation, which I write about in the book. I'm only laughing because it was actually kind of funny.
It was funny.
Which you'll read it and find out. But yeah, the psychological evaluation, which the whole point of it was, are you not going to talk to your child about where they came from? So yes, we've already started talking to Clementine about that. And actually there's a story coming out on WBUR where they recorded Clem talking about where she came from. So she already understands, not exactly, but you know, in age appropriate ways. And then that our particular clinic that we used, they do only closed egg donations, but we actually wanted to have an open donation so we could have contact with the donor, which they wouldn't allow. But once I was pregnant, I found out that different agencies, and especially if you pay more money, and there's this whole like hierarchy of how much money you pay for different kinds of access, which is kind of like gross. And like there's a whole part of that we could talk about too. But once I was pregnant, I had this like crisis in my mind of like, did I do the wrong thing? Because I could have like, for whatever, who knows, $10,000 more gone to a clinic and been able to like Skype or Zoom with the donor. And it's like, I mean, all these add-ons, you know, it's like this crazy thing. And then in terms of like, I would love if there was a way to actually meet the donor and also any half siblings that Clementine might have, because she's an only child and she's going to be an only child. And so wouldn't it be great if there were others? And I know there are, but we don't know where they are. So we could go on like 23andMe or Ancestry and maybe find the donor, but we had signed contracts saying that we would not do that because it's a closed donation. And so I'm leaving that up to Clementine, whether she wants to do that in the future.
Yeah. But that was a really fascinating whole section of the book. You choosing which donor and looking at these photos and Rob's opinion versus yours and the doctor weighing in. I mean, I was like, what's going to happen?
What's going to happen? Yeah. And so that was like the Spread the Jellies, this kind of new-ish motherhood site that publishes essays. And so that's sort of what the essay was about, like finding our baby's mama, as we jokingly called her. But yeah, it's so hard. It's like swiping on these pictures of young women and like, you don't know who the people are. You don't get to talk to them. You don't really know much about them. And yet they are genetically related to your child. So, yeah. And do you have children now? I forgot if you said.
Yeah, so they're 2 and 4, but when they get a little bit older, I do want to talk to them about, I don't know any of the couples that I donated to, but I know one at least child was born. So I'm like, they have half siblings biologically, and I want to tell them about it at some point. But we'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, from all sides. It's so
Yeah.
interesting.
Maybe, I guess I didn't think about there being resources for parents to talk to even young kids about these things, so I might look that up.
Yeah, there are books, lots of books. And so like there's this book called something like The P in Me. And so I explained to Clementine that, you know, she's the P and like all these people wanted her to, you know, loved her so much and brought her to life. And then there's another book where like there's the egg and the sperm. And so I was reading to her about the egg and the sperm, and she's like, I thought I was a pea. She was like, Mom. So she like gets it, you know, to an extent, but it's funny because she's like correcting me. She's like, I'm a pea, not an egg.
You have the same last name, and
Oh.
I came here wondering if I am your lost abandoned son.
Oh, maybe.
But I do have a serious question,
Okay.
which is you talked about being 55 and 45, and I was wondering whether the other 45 manifested itself at any point.
That's really interesting. Not since she's been born. I think when I was pregnant, sometimes I'm like, wait, why am I doing this? And like, you know, just like all the feelings that come up being pregnant. And then in the bookstore, there is this scene that we talked about running into my ex-husband in the bookstore. And I had been bleeding a little bit. And it turned out I had something called a subchorionic hematoma. None of this matters except to say that there was always this anxiety during my pregnancy of like, will this become, you know, something bad? Will this be a miscarriage of some sort? And so during that time, I was just like very in my head, like, is this like, why did I do this to myself? But no, since our child has been born, I've been 155%. But like, I did wonder if that was, you know, I didn't know if that was going to be the case.
Yeah.
And also, yeah, like it's a total crapshoot being a parent. Like you could love your kid or they could be a total jerk or sometimes both things at once.
I close this book amazed that any of us are born, just learning so much about how an embryo comes to exist and then how it makes it through pregnancy. I closed the book and I looked at my 3 kids and I was like, oh my God, I can't even believe you guys are here.
Yes. And there's that research by the same researcher, I can't think of her name, Catherine something. It says the chances of any of us being born 1 in 70 trillion.
Yeah.
Like exactly as you are, that's 1 in 70 trillion.
Yeah.
I like can't believe like that's just
wild.
like awe, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an amazing book.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
everyone
you
for
so
coming.
much, Ruthie.
Thank you.
Yeah.